Welcome back to Beyond the Fantasy, the channel where we explore how easily even our favourite fantasy authors can get the history wrong, sometimes perpetuating overly simplistic or outright inaccurate stereotypes about the past. When it comes to medieval peasants, particularly the villein, their lives were far more than just simple farm work and basic survival. They were entangled in a relentless and complex web of financial burdens that many fantasy narratives conveniently gloss over. Today, we're pushing past those fictions to uncover the staggering list of actual fees, dues, and obligations that truly defined a villein's existence, and the real cost of their unfree status. First, let's touch on an older concept to understand the social standing we're dealing with: Wergild. In early medieval England, before the full weight of the manorial system, a person's life had a price, a Wergild. A freeman, like a churl, had a recognised value. But by the time villeinage was established, the villein themselves generally had no personal Wergild. Harm to them was harm to their lord's property. This lack of personal legal value is a stark indicator of their unfree status, a world away from the earlier freemen. Now, on to the manor. A villein's life was a complex web of payments, not just in labour, but in goods and coin, often from cradle to grave. When a villein family first acquired their strip of land, their vergate or half-vergate, they paid an entry fine called Gersum. And simply living in their house often meant paying Heushire, or house rent, either yearly or whenever the lord demanded. Many dues were originally services, later often commuted to cash payments. Woolsilver might be paid instead of shearing the lord's sheep. Maltsilver for providing malt for the lord's ale. Fishsilver for supplying fish from local streams. Vinesilver if the manor had a vineyard and you owed labour there. And a common one, Foddercorn, a payment of oats from each vergate, almost certainly to feed the lord's horses and livestock. Then there were payments related to duties or protection. Wardpenny was typically a payment made by villeins for the upkeep of local defences or as a commutation for guard duty. And an intriguing one, filsting pound, which seems to have been a payment, perhaps to the lord or a communal fund he controlled, as a sort of insurance against harsh fines or excessive corporeal punishments. Personal life was also subject to the lord's financial interest. If a villein's daughter had a child out of wedlock, the family paid learwhite. When she married, her father or she paid merchant to the lord for the right, essentially a fee for the loss of a potential labourer from the lord's perspective. And death offered no escape from dues. When a villein died, his family owed Heriot to the lord, typically their best or sometimes second best beast. This was a recognition that all their worldly goods, like their land, ultimately belonged to the lord. The church might also claim a mortuary fee, often the second best animal, which was a separate ecclesiastical due. For the heir to then take over the family land, another significant fine or Gersum was due to the lord. Want to leave the manor? That would cost you chevage, an annual fee paid to the lord for permission to live elsewhere, acknowledging you were still his villein. So, the lord profited at every turn: entry to land, house rent, commuted labour, fines for personal conduct, marriage, death, inheritance, and even for leaving. The life of a villein was one of constant obligation, the specifics varying by manor, but the underlying principle clear. Their labour, their property, and even their families were subject to the lord's exactions.